Ladies and gentlemen, it's 6 o'clock in London, it's 1 p.m. in New York. I hope you're having a lovely lunch. 1 a.m. in Hong Kong. And Gong Chi Fa Chai. Happy New Year to everybody there as the Year of the Ox is getting underway. It's 3 a.m. in Sydney, 10 a.m. in San Francisco, and 10:30 at night in Mumbai. Greetings, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, depending on where you are in the world. My name is Patrick L. Young. The IPO-VID live stream, Series 4, Episode 2, Number 20, starts here. Once upon a time, long, long ago, in a distant galaxy of technological markets, I called out CBOT and said that if the Chicago Board of Trade didn't get their act together, they would likely close or be acquired. Cue apoplexy. And perhaps, well, it's partially thanks to that notorious Irish forgiveness gene prevalent in many of my peeps. I still seem to have not been forgiven in some quarters of Chicago. But then again, see also the London Stock Exchange Group's inability to rationalise that way. Oh, whatever. Look, anyway, last week's results from the CME, spun as ever with vigour by the Chicago Mercantile Exchange as being, well, a tricky quarter, demonstrate that the world's once mega-dominant dollar monopoly silo is in huge difficulty. I've said it again and again. Milking a monopoly is a very dangerous strategy. Flaccidity creeps in, and before you know it, those taken for granted contracts seep to the businesses who value their customers. The CME stock didn't react well to the results and is now down about 15% in what has been, let's face it, a corking year to date. My goodness, we've even seen 31,000 on the Nikkei Dai in Japan. Only 30 years since we last saw 30,000 on the Nikkei Dai in Japan. But anyway, the CME stock remains highly valued, given the earnings outlook is one where management appears incapable of improving the outlook. The CME tipping point is approaching. Everyone else is making hay in the parage, and the status quo won't do. Until then, and until we see some form of revolution within the CME management, all bets are off. CME may not be TPI cap, but it is a standard deviation or so away from where it needs to be. Since our last show, good news in Brexit. The pound against the dollar. You'll remember, of course, that by this point in time, we were going to be immersed in the United Kingdom in civil war. There was going to be fire, famine, pestilence, flood. And indeed, the pound would be worth something equivalent to, well, whichever peso, cruzeiro, or other collapsing currency you wanted to mention. Well, it all proved wrong once again, ladies and gentlemen. The pound is back against the level to the dollar it was in February 2016 before campaigning kicked off for the great referendum of June the 23rd. And in the city, well, great news. The City United project promises to represent the future of the world's largest financial centre, where other older entities, amongst other industry associations, councils et al., have singularly failed for the past 5 years to lead us forward. Other good news in Brexit? Well, amongst other things, we're hearing all sorts of exciting news of new markets and interesting things going on. The City United is certainly a project worth supporting, as unity is vital for the city to succeed in this brave new world of Brexit. However, it's not all been good news on Brexit. Amongst other stories, the European Union is now banning live shellfish caught in UK waters from entering the continent. It appears the problem with the Brussels attitude is not merely the issue of crustaceans caught crossing customs borders that the EU seeks to impose due to their ongoing desire to hamper the United Kingdom, but in perspective, the whole EU approach, where, after all, let's face it, what do you call a one-percenter, as I said a few weeks ago, in the European Union, but a member of the vaccinated. The European Union's approach looks like one even a mollusk might be able to rationalise as being flawed. Will Brussels suffer photosynthesis? Well, it may not be imminent, but I think that plausible outcome is underpriced. That said, it wasn't quite photosynthesis, but Britain was uniquely blooming this week. In a UK first, a moonflower from the Amazon, no less, an Amazonian cactus, bloomed in Cambridge for 12 hours last weekend. The first time this has ever flowered in Britain. Good grief! When the history of Britain is such that even rare Amazonian flowers are coming and flocking to the United Kingdom to bloom and blossom under Brexit, what sort of achievements can we manage in another couple of years? All this and more, ladies and gentlemen, has been covered in greater detail in Exchange Invest Daily, the unique newsletter of the Bourse Business. Send us an email or hit me up on whatever social media stream you're watching this from, Patrick L. Young, on social media. and we can get you signed up to understand the exchange business. And before I go on, and before I introduce our fantastic guest today, ladies and gentlemen, just one thing. Valentine's Day is past. I realize you've probably given out the red envelopes in China to all of your relatives. Just share a little love with us, please. Give us a like. Ping that button at the bottom of your social media screen. All of those likes go forward and help this podcast, live stream, however you're watching it, be enjoyed across the world by more people. Our guest today, Barnabas Reynolds. We're going to be discussing Building Brexit Britain, the legal opportunity. Barney is the head of financial institutions at Shearman Sterling, a leading law practice in the City of London, and he leads their city-based financial services law team. Barney's Enhanced Equivalence model for post-Brexit trade has been adopted by the UK government. He has been a member of the Star Chamber, which advised MPs on Brexit. His post-Brexit solutions to a no-deal scenario have been published by Politeia on various different occasions in several must-read papers if you want to get on top of the whole Brexit affair, particularly with an angle on financial services, the art of the no deal. He also co-authored Managing Euro Risk. And indeed, he's been involved in a team drafting the entire civil and commercial regime for Abu Dhabi's financial centre, ADGM, and a very, very lovely financial centre it is, having visited last year. And indeed, it was the first non-Commonwealth application of the English common law. We'll be talking later about Barney's latest publication, The UK Must Renounce, Damaging Legacy of EU Law, is the thrust from the middle of that. And you can download all those papers from Politeia, to which I see the link is on the screen at the moment, politeia.co.uk. Barney Reynolds, good evening and welcome to the show. Where in the world are you today?
Evening, Patrick. Thank you for having me on your show. It's fantastic to be here and very, very enjoyable. I'm in London, in central London, where I'm working from home pending our release on the 8th of March or whenever that happens.
Excellent. And I do believe also greetings already via LinkedIn from His Excellency David Cam. So thank you very much for watching this evening. Barney, you're bringing us a better class of viewer already, and we haven't even asked you a question. Good grief. Thank you, Your Excellency, for saying hello. It's lovely to see you this evening. Where else in the world would you be but London? Of course, the epicenter of this historic Brexit movement and close to the City of London, although you're not quite there at the moment, thanks to lockdown, as you said. So let's take it all back. I mean, tell me a little bit about yourself, Barney, and how you came to be a leading legal eagle in the Brexit sphere.
Well, I'm a lawyer, a financial services lawyer in the City of London, specialising in UK and EU financial regulatory law. And I'm the head of financial institutions at the global law firm Shearman Sterling, which is a US headquartered law firm. And I'm personally based in the city. Financial services is my lifeblood. It's what I do advise on all day, both domestically within the city, but also cross-border, more importantly. And then when the referendum for Brexit came along, I started writing a few pieces on how it could be handled in a legal and regulatory sense in order to make it a success. I published something called the Blueprint for Brexit with Politeia in 2016, which set out that on the one hand, after Brexit, we would seek an enhanced equivalence deal with the EU, and on the other hand, if that wasn't forthcoming, we would operate under through the sort of gaps in the legal systems which allow us to continue trading and dealing with EU customers after Brexit anyway. That was quite controversial, and people said, "Oh, you can't do equivalence," and all sorts of publications came out saying equivalence was nonsense. So I wrote it up. I wrote something called the Template for Enhanced Equivalence with legal text for how to do it, and that was subsequently adopted by the government after checkers, if you remember back to Theresa May and Philip Hammond. And then people started saying, "Oh, you've got to have this, otherwise we're completely done for." So I wrote another publication at the end of November 2017 called The Art of No Deal, which basically set out the various legal models across the entire financial services industry for dealing in the EU without a deal. And then people said, well, why would the EU ever give us a deal? So I explained in another publication, which I co-authored, called Managing Euro Risk, what the leverage of the UK is, which is all about how fragile the EU Eurozone structure is and how dangerous it is for everyone else in the world, and how the UK has been effectively paying the price of that for the rest of the world, and protecting the EU and mitigating that risk. And then finally, as you mentioned, I've just written this thing, Restoring UK Law, which is essentially explains what the issue has been for the UK within the EU in using a continental method of lawmaking, and why it hasn't worked for the city very well, and how we need to lift that off now after Brexit in order to recapture the competitiveness of the city. So that's the full history. And along the way, I ended up sort of being invited to advise a whole lot of MPs. So that was the appointment to the Star Chamber, and obviously I think the government's familiar with my ideas, and helping businesses navigate it. So it's sort of just been a whirlwind of stuff on top of my normal day job.
It's quite incredible how you managed to put it all together, actually. I'm really impressed. But what I certainly take from that is, isn't it interesting that you have somewhere like Abu Dhabi who go along, and I mean, they literally man-made an island so that it was separate from the main part of the city, of the state. And then they got you to write, amongst others in the team, a complete new set of laws. And what are the laws that they actually go for? They go for standard British common law without a European Union twist, as I understand it. And in a way, we're now trying to get ourselves back to the Emirati equivalence of UK law.
Yeah, I actually, yes, I led that team and effectively designed that legal system, which is basically an adoption of the English common law case law system from time to time on an evergreen basis, which I think is the most sophisticated legal system for commerce in the world, and they decided that that was true. We didn't import any elements of EU law because that sort of has polluted the common law, and held it back in a number of ways. And then drafted with the team statutes on specialist areas like company law, insolvency law, employment, data protection, and so on. But yeah, I mean, it's the first time this has been done. The IFC in Dubai had a sort of codified version of the common law, which is sort of a hybrid between the common law system and with elements of the codified continental models. And similarly, Qatar and Kazakhstan. Whereas ADGM is the first time in the world Singapore and Hong Kong had it, and still have it. But it's the first time in the world that anyone has voluntarily taken on and received, if you like, English common law. I think I'm very pleased with it. It's doing well.
Yeah, it's fabulous, and it's an incredible financial centre. We visited there, oh gosh, it must be 18 months ago now, and it was spectacular, actually, to see how well the ADGM is going. And of course, at the end of March, I mean, everybody in the parish of exchanges is excited because we're going to get ICE Futures Abu Dhabi launching as well, which will be a very exciting addition to that marketplace. With
the Merban future being traded, so for the first time, I think the oil market out there, big subject to exchange trading and price setting. So I think it's a major event, and that's going to be an ADGM, which already has over 10,000 people in it, and over 2,200 companies within 4.5 years. So it is doing very well.
No, it is. It's very, very impressive the way that it's accelerated. It's quite a sensational, and it's a beautiful feeling because they do have that separate island, which gives you the idea that it's, I mean, even more isolated than the City of London manages to make with its ownership of the bridges, so you can get from the south to the north without traversing their territory, as it were. So, look, it's really interesting. I mean, we take this whole idea of the future of the UK legal and regulatory system, and by the way, ladies and gentlemen, don't be shy. Ask a question if you'd like to ask Barney anything in relation to this whole Brexit opportunity, or indeed if you've got a comment to make, we will welcome them during the course of the next 45 minutes. So yes, the future of the UK legal and regulatory system, and I've got to say, the big thing that sort of springs to mind first of all is almost that big why. I mean, it all goes, the whole Brexit question, everything. I mean, I think a lot of people miss out on perhaps the why and where it came from.
I completely agree, and that's the first part of this new book on restoring UK law that I've written, because I think that gets easily lost, and one can debate the trade-offs and benefits of pooling sovereignty in commercial terms, but for the UK, it has meant losing something really quite intrinsic to society here. And this is not just for common law, which is applicable in England, Wales, and Northern Ireland, but also Scots law shares the same features in this context, which is our system presumptively treats people as being free. And that includes not just individuals, but businesses. And so our system involves writing specific rules and restrictions or imposing liabilities when for things that go wrong, and restrictions for things that create risk that can't be allowed, but otherwise allows people to innovate. And if you look at the UK's history, you see, I mean, obviously, particularly in the 19th century, but phenomenal innovation, and it's permitted by that legal system. And you nowadays see that in Silicon Valley in the US. You still have it here in various sectors, and you do have it in financial services. But we've layered on to our way of doing things a legal regime and an approach to law from the EU, which has actually nothing to do with our system and is quite alien to our system. And I think people here find it quite difficult to understand and operate, which in a way is part of, and at root of, why it's been so difficult increasingly over recent years within the EU, whether one regarded it as a desirable thing to overlook that or not, which is that the EU has taken on the continental way of lawmaking developed through Franco-German codes from the 19th century. And perhaps not surprisingly, those two were at the start of the whole project. And that method of lawmaking is completely alien to this presumptive freedom-based common law, Scots law approach, where instead you seek to write down rules that govern every hypothetical situation you can imagine anyone wishing to do. And you write effectively, therefore, a code governing all legal situations. And in the EU, that in financial services, that was rolled out, that blanket of law based on the continental code-based methods was rolled out starting in 1989 over the following 20 years. And we've now got EU law covering everything on the code-based model. And what this means is that if you're looking to do something new in financial services in the EU and in the UK until we change this regime, obviously we've tried to ameliorate it with our people and systems and methods as much as possible, but nevertheless, you want to do something new, you have to look into in investment banking the 1.7 million provisions in MiFID II and so on, which are beyond any one human being's ability to, in terms of carrying them in their heads and being able to manipulate and apply those rules. And what that does in turn is provide not only a lot of restriction, it also, because of the way the rules are drafted, the opacity of them, and the fact that they're subject under the EU approach to a purposive method of interpretation. So if you want to understand what the rule does, you have to look to its purpose, which is again opaque, and officials can assert purposes, which then leads people to consult officials on what the law is, where the officials say, no, that's not the purpose. And it also leads to it leads to all sorts of things being restricted that actually are unnecessarily restricted. And so, as a result of that, innovation is constricted more than it should ever be. And I think we need to lift all of this off, this methodology off. And if you're wanting to understand, in my view, partly in a way at roots why Brexit happened, it's a lot of the reason is to do with the fact that the codified way of thinking, which has an answer in advance of every problem, you're not presumptively free. You try and organize the market and actually control the market. So the continental system is based on a wish to control the market rather than to let it flourish and be free. That is at the heart of an awful lot of things, because I think society, the reasoning in society and how societies live and exist and so on is intrinsically bound up with its legal system. And in the UK, our way of thinking and approach is reflected in and derived from our system. In the EU, it's reflected and derived from a Franco-German system that we find difficult to understand and operate with.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, because that's something that a lot of people don't think about in the noise that we've had through the whole Brexit issue, and also how the City of London and financial markets have been fundamentally changed. I mean, certainly, I found it rather ironic that we ended up with the European Union that was complaining about the substantive capital flowing around the City of London and the limited companies that had absolutely no shame. But if I remember correctly, the 1989 legislation was the thing that actually stopped stockbrokers having partnerships, for example, which was a lovely concept, because actually they didn't tend to blow up and have incredibly speculative gambles on anything because their well-being was on the line. It's just one example I can think of.
I agree. I agree. You've nailed it. I mean, there are endless examples of specific policies and points which I don't think the UK would ever have done on its own. I'm not sure we'd have done AIFMD. I don't think we'd have done Solvency II in the form it's in. I don't think we'd have done a lot of MiFID II in the form it's in, and so on. So there are endless policy aspects that are at odds with how the UK does things. But then there's this underlying methodology, which is so different, and I think the UK finds so alien. And we've tried to operate as best we can, but it's not something that's hardwired into the system properly and doesn't easily fit with our approach to the law.
Well, it's also the very interesting issue, as you say, between individual liberty and the corporatization of everything. So everything has to be a body corporate. I mean, an individual cannot petition the European Union because they don't care, which I find somewhat of a concern, because if Einstein had just popped in a letter to the European Union in sort of 1940 something, they would have ignored him, because unless he was actually at that time backed by a suitable corporate entity, they wouldn't have wanted to listen to him. Whereas I do think the United Kingdom has traditionally been remarkably good at allowing everybody to do whatever they wanted, whether they were an individual or whether they were a multinational company.
And the evidence shows, I mean, economic evidence shows, and a lot of American research has been done on this in recent times, how the common law approach, as I say, Scots law actually gets the same benefits in this context because it's not codified, leads to greater economic growth and more successful financial markets. And it's not happenstance that the most successful financial markets in the world are all in common law centres, so London, New York, Singapore, Hong Kong, and so creating this whole control-based model where you try and control in advance how a market works may work, I'm not sure, but it may work for certain types of industry where things don't change very much. But I don't believe it works for something which involves innovation, because no group of people, however bright, can be omniscient and predict what others are going to wish to do in due course. So what you end up having is constantly a body of officials trying to upgrade and update the law and catch up with business, by which time the real innovators may have moved on and tried out something else and just given up on that particular thing. And that's why I think we don't have the level of innovation that one needs, would wish to see, in my view, across the EU. And now the UK can, and we still retain that because of our common law legacy, but we can get back to real innovation, massive innovation on a wide scale by lifting off the cloak of EU law and going back to that approach.
It certainly sounds very exciting. So if I may interrupt you in midstream, we've got our first question of the evening. It's time to lift our chins up because it's coming from Martin Watkins and it's quite long, so I can see over the top of it. Hi, Barney. Great to see you again. The European Commission launched its consultation on the Settlement Finality Directive this week with 33 references to distributed ledger technology. What advice would you give to UK authorities wishing to apply SFD, investor protection, to digital assets? Thank you, Martin.
Well, actually, the best answer for the UK, generally speaking, on these sorts of innovations is do nothing, if possible, because the judges, and we do need to get more case law back into the system. I'd get rid of the ombudsman, actually, and have small claims courts for small cases so that you get more judgments. But the judges can generally speaking, adjust the law to deal with distributed ledger technology, Bitcoin, or whatever. So we didn't need, so for the introduction of the euro under English law, I don't think it caused a problem. For Y2K, I don't think it caused a problem under English law. And I think, it's a consensus built system in advance of a court judgment. And the court judgment will then settle the point and you can move on. So the idea that you need 33 provisionals dealing with DLTs is completely alien to our system. Now, I'd have to look at the wording of the Settlement Finality Directive to see if there's sufficient wiggle room for a court to be able to make it work for DLT, but I would strongly suspect it can be made to work, or at least, if not, a very small adjustment would be required, if anything.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Thank you, Martin, for the question. Thank you very much, Barney, for the answer. So if we start moving things forward to where we are, in the course of the last few months and now, I mean, you're welcome to discuss the negotiation, because at one point in time, Britain had a government under Theresa May, and I'm not really sure they were negotiating. And then we had a new government, which definitely was negotiating, albeit with slight problems due to what had been not negotiated previously. How do you view the whole Brexit miasma at the moment and how it's ended up with financial services?
Well, I mean, you're right to point to what's what happened under the Theresa May administration. It was unfortunate. I think it was so she was seen to be trying to so having reclaimed sovereignty from Brexit, the decision for Brexit, she wants to hand back sovereignty to the EU on the goods and agri-products economy, which was an extraordinary thing, because within the EU, sovereignty is pooled. So you have people with a seat at the table, and you can participate in rulemaking, and you may or may not like the result, which is the Brexit point, but nevertheless, you have a vote on it. As a pure conceptual matter, the idea of not having any sovereignty at all and following someone else's rules is extraordinary. Now, that whole episode has left us with some things to untangle, but the main untangling has been done by the Boris Johnson government very successfully. So there's been a trade deal reached, which came into operation from the beginning of this year, the Trade and Cooperation Agreement, which deals with goods and agri-products. Now, it does not deal with financial services. There's an element to which it deals with services. This allows for cross-border provision of services, which is more than Canada, which is why it's called Canada Plus. So if you look at, I mean, it's basically Canada on goods and agri-products, and then the plus on services and other bits and pieces. There are some little bits on goods that are slightly less good, like the EU not wanting to respect our conformity assessment processes and so on, which I suspect will disappear over time at a point, and be sort of corrected. But on the bulk of what would be in a trade deal, they've done well. They haven't had. I mean, I came up with enhanced equivalence. I provided the treaty text for it. I think it would still be possible for the EU to agree to that. They've got to want to do it. The other bit of unfinished business is on Northern Ireland, where the conceptual approach is a legacy from the May administration, which is EU law being applied in Northern Ireland, including EU state aid law under the oversight of the European Commission, with the European Court of Justice interpreting it. Now, obviously, as a sovereignty matter, that's unacceptable. I'm not even sure it's enforceable under the Vienna Convention. It's also completely at odds with the decision of the ECJ in relation to citizens in Gibraltar, where it was decided that every citizen needs a right to vote on laws that affect them. The 4-year look-back arrangement in the protocol, the Northern Ireland Protocol, where the Northern Ireland citizens get an ability to vote 4 years later on to get rid of this a system they don't like, is insufficient and is not compatible with that. So it conceptually is highly questionable whether it achieves anything at all and whether it needs to be followed. But the UK is currently trying to make this work through easements. In my view, it should be replaced entirely with a sovereign arrangement, rather like the TCA, and I think ultimately that will come. Financial services, I think we'll end up with some sort of set of accommodations, but if not, there are plenty of ways to service EU customers without a place of business in the EU through reverse solicitation arrangements. Those customers are going to want the best services and products they're going to seek them out. Or through those customers having minor presences and places of business here, which is a minuscule cost compared with paying the overhead for some intermediary institution in the EU. And the reason I think that it's going to have to be, the EU are going to have to move in their approach is when the world starts to focus on what's happened in the Eurozone, which is that the legal architecture, which treats the member states as being sovereign, whilst having a federal sovereign monetary system, is like a giant shell game. It's the two propositions are incompatible. It's the same on trade. It wants to be the EU for trade purposes, Eurozone for monetary purposes, and member states for fiscal purposes, and those propositions are incompatible. And in particular, a member state doesn't control the central bank and so can't guarantee to repay its debts by virtue of having the ability to print more money in order to pay those debts, which is a basic premise behind sovereign treatment of the Basel rules, which makes member debt or true sovereign debt akin to cash, because you can always rely on it to be there. It might go down in value a bit, but you're always going to get something so long as the sovereign tells its central bank to print some money. Not the case in relation to Eurozone member state debt, which is basically sub-sovereign, more like municipal debt in the States. That conceptual flaw riddles itself through the entire single rule book, EU single rule book. It's another reason, in fact, to get rid of this whole thing, because it's extremely risky. And the Bank of England at the moment mitigates that risk for the global market, for the benefit of the global market in the UK as well, by imposing capital top-up requirements on businesses incorporated here and dealing with the EU. Within the EU passport regime, EU incorporated institutions were able to evade those rules and just passport into the UK, applying rules that did not reflect Eurozone risk, and the EBA, which perhaps paradoxically conducts Eurozone stress tests, it's a pan-EU body, but it actually does the Eurozone stress test, does not address Eurozone risk in its stress test reports. And so there are no capital top-ups for EU financial institutions for the Eurozone. And for that, in my view, the only safe way in this sort of situation where I don't believe that there's the money or the political will to integrate to the necessary degree to neutralize that debt and make it truly sovereign, nor do I believe there's the money to capitalize the banking system to reflect the true risk being put into the system by those treatments, which is risk not just for the Eurozone in the EU, but for the rest of the world as well. So in the short term, for the next 20, 30 years, while the EU decides whether to integrate, I think they will continue to need the cooperation and help of the City of London and the regulators here in mitigating that risk in the way that the UK has been doing whilst within the EU. But this is a big point for the world. This is not some minor thing, it's a technicality. You're talking trillions here in terms, and the risk is extraordinary. We saw the result of Californian subprime debts and Florida subprime debts and so on, in causing the 2007-2008 crisis. That's nothing compared with the state-sponsored debt that's been created through these rules, and it's untraceable. On an immediate level, it's traceable. I mean, you could put capital charges on people holding Eurozone member state bonds, which are largely held within the Eurozone. And the Euro system itself buys them and props itself up using these bonds. But the second order and third order and so on effects are untraceable. And that's the real worry for the world. And the UK has been stepping up to the plate dealing with that.
Yeah, I mean, I can't remember the numbers exactly, but I mean, the Italians are well on their way towards 200% debt to GDP is now in sight. They went through what is 160, I think, recently. And you're talking about something like at least a third of that debt is being potentially held by the ECB pretty much directly before you even allow for what's being held in the banking system. And that's only one part of the Eurozone. I mean, one of the 5 major Eurozone countries. So it's quite scary altogether. Now, you went through so much stuff there, Barney. I've got to just take you back and to try and help break down a few things, if I may. And ladies and gentlemen, if you've got a question, ask now. Barney will be delighted to answer. We've got a guru of the Brexit legal thinking from the United Kingdom here, member of the Star Chamber, as it was, that's advised the UK government in the past when it was working its way towards various agreements.
Yeah,
sometimes it seemed in the dark without much of an idea where the UK government was going, but certainly they got things together. So talk to us about, I mean, you've made a very, very big macro point that the Eurozone has a big problem. And clearly, I'm minded to think of the first time we appeared together at that great Prosperity UK conference where you kindly invited me to come along beside. I felt truly mind blown to be sitting beside Michael Spencer, now Baron Spencer, and indeed Jeffrey Sprecher, the Chief Executive Vice and Chairman of the New York Stock Exchange. But I think Jeff made a point at that point in time, which was, to the room, I mean, you're London, you've got the money. I would get a bit of swagger on, I think was exactly the phrase that Jeff put together. So, I mean, in terms of how you see that playing out, is the issue one that the United Kingdom, the City of London's financial system centre has just better links to the world to bring money in and more money under its suzerainty? Or is it also a structuring and a skill that could come to play in order to try and help the Eurozone as it could go through difficulties?
I think it definitely has the skills to help the Eurozone. I remember that event as well, and just Rekha absolutely said that. And so, we had, two mega entrepreneurs, in historical terms, frankly, with a much more positive attitude than many, and so which I think should give people pause for thought as the analysis on this. And I agree. I think the city has the intellectual wherewithal and expertise to solve financial problems, whatever they are, and that includes the Eurozone problem. It's a very difficult problem to solve, obviously, because there's a political element as well, which is going to have to work its way through. At the moment, Northern Europe benefits in three key ways from this whole setup, and is disinclined to give up those benefits. In a way, it's got its cake and is eating it mightily. So, for instance, the euro is undervalued for the Northern Eurozone. So they are exporting. This is the giant shell game where it's sovereign for, it's EU for trade purposes, Eurozone for monetary purposes, and member state for fiscal purposes. But if you're a Northern Eurozone country, you're playing on the EU trade point. So you get the benefit of an external facing arrangement struck by the EU, or the WTO arrangement for the EU, but with a currency which is structurally undervalued. It's structurally suppressed because of the Eurozone arrangements and how they went in, because there's no reallocations happening that trues things up, which is a massive advantage. There's no corresponding payback to Italy and the southern countries that are effectively competing in the world at too high a price. That's the first thing. Second, Target 2 means that there is effectively almost unlimited financing for Eurozone producers, obviously particularly the successful ones in the north. And that's because Target 2, if a Greek company wants to buy 10 cars from a German seller, they can borrow money from their Greek bank, which can borrow the money from the Greek central bank. They then, when they make the purchase, pay the money over to the German seller, which deposits the money with its German bank, which deposits its money with the Bundesbank. But there's never any account reconciliation between the Greek central bank and the Bundesbank. The debits and credits just keep going up and up and up, and I think Germany has got around $1 trillion credits in the Target 2 system, which I suspect will never be repaid. What that system does, though, effectively, is provide unlimited financing to the purchasers from Eurozone vendors still in business, and that is a subsidization, which is in breach of WTO law. The monetary effects are in breach of the anti-dumping rules under WTO law. And then the third effect is the banking system being run on the cheap. So there are loans being made on the basis from banks that aren't capitalized up to reflect the true risk in the system, contrary to the Basel rules. So all of those three benefits, in breach of international laws and standards, effectively are very nice if you could keep the show on the road. But the moment of collision is happening because the South is beginning to say, well, I want redistribution, and I want, your standard of living seems to be going up and up and up, and mine's not. And that redistribution element, which I don't think has been explained to the North, the populations in the North fully, and I don't think the people have bought into, is coming, and it's being accelerated by COVID. The 750 billion fund, which of course isn't 750 billion, there's something like 350 billion of new money, grant money, isn't going to be nothing like enough to keep the show on the road. So there are some very difficult things ahead, and this involves understanding financial matters, economic matters, but also legal matters, and pulling together all those disciplines to find a solution. And there are solutions, and then executing on that. But I mean, obviously the client, as it were, in this case, the Eurozone, is going to have to want some help. All countries wishing to get out of it or to change their position within it, whatever. But it can be done. But it's a very, very risky setup, frankly, and it could go wrong quite quickly, and we need to be ready for that.
And I think the message coming from that is, if you're currently living in the Eurozone, then you've got a choice of a binary opportunity, which is either call the Samaritans or call the City of London. One of those, I'm sure, has got equivalents throughout the European Union, the Samaritans, presumably, but the City of London at the moment doesn't have equivalents. And you devised this very interesting concept of enhanced equivalence. The European Union has been incredibly sniffy about delivering equivalence, and all I can say is, it seems incredibly bizarre given the fact you've got the biggest financial and most cosmopolitan international financial centre in the world on your doorstep, and yet the European Union is quite happy to recognise perfectly reasonable, but by comparison minuscule financial entities in, say, the Middle East and around the rest of the world, which is quite different. So explain to us a little bit about where you see the equivalence debate and where you think this could possibly play out.
So I think it all goes back to the law. I mean, the EU, just reminding ourselves of the real bedrock point here. The EU system is based on a codified civil law model which seeks to control markets and provide in advance a sort of structure that those markets have to operate within, come what may, until the code is updated. And the codes are only ever accreted to. They're almost never, there's MiFID quick fix, but almost never are provisions removed or deregulation occurs. And what the law and it almost goes with a mercantilist approach to trade as well. The EU finds it very unsettling now. In terms of the Brexit, very unsettling, I think, because it's with the UK within the EU. It's been used to controlling, and in fact, Monsieur Barney himself was a financial services commissioner after the 2007-8 financial crisis, and drove through an awful lot of the law and rules that I'm not now talking about. And so this is a kind of an immediate rollback, potentially. I think it will be, because I think we're going to do what I'm predicting. And that then means the EU will not have the same level of control at all. Moreover, they're worried about the Eurozone system. I don't think the UK is going to do anything to spike the Eurozone or make it difficult. But on the other hand, I don't think either that we should go along with this whole thing as if it's not there and pretend that the elephant's not in the room when it is. So that's where we are. And I think they will, I mean, I think they're hoping that somehow forces in the UK or the markets will keep the UK aligned. There's all this language about divergence, which is premised on the idea that you can pull a rubber band only so far away from something, and that the post is the EU. That's the sort of gold standard, but as I've explained, it's anything but. But all the languages around that, I don't think it's going to turn out to be what the UK does, and I think that hope of the EU is going to be misplaced. And then they're going to be confronted with seeing what the UK system looks like, which I think is going to be a reclaimed common law system with higher standards traditionally, and fewer rules, with no excuses for not granting equivalence, because we do have higher standards, frankly. But this tension is going to play on, I suspect, sadly, for a little while. We're just going to see, how long it takes before reality sort of comes back to bear. In the meantime, UK businesses, I would suggest, should use all the means at their disposal to make money under a reordered UK system by selling into the EU under the EU laws. I don't think the EU are going to close themselves down on a purely Napoleonic mercantilist model entirely. I don't think it can. So we'll have to wait for this to play through. I think the markets mean that, the Napoleonic blockade of the UK lasted something like 8 years. I think it's much quicker in the modern world. I don't think it's going to last so long at all. But we sort of have to let this play out, because there is almost a disbelief and an unwillingness to accept that the UK is going to do its own thing. I think the UK has to do its own thing for all the reasons I've said. I don't think it's satisfactory, the current system will set up. I don't think these Eurozone rules that we're in fact applying, which sort of ignore and create and then ignore trillions of risk, are the things that we can accept. So I think something has to be done. And so at some moment in time, there will be a normalization. There'll be an equivalent set of declarations. I think there will ultimately be an enhanced equivalence deal. But the tension has been, my proposal for enhanced equivalence is the UK does what we do under our common law methods and make the rules that we think are sensible, and that we have sort of observed Basel standards as we see fit. But that's basically it. What the EU would like, is for the UK to basically carry on applying all EU law. And that I just don't think that's going to happen. And how long it takes for the EU to accept that point, I don't know. How long it takes for them to accept that this business grab, using regulation to grab business as a political thing rather than a risk management thing, so completely the opposite of how regulation should be used. is very, very dangerous. I just don't think the world will allow that to watch in silence while that happens. And I don't think it'll work, because the markets go where they make money, not where they're told to go.
Yeah, I think that's a very good point indeed. And in fact, on that note, we've got a great question that's come in from Tom Lant. Good evening, Tom. It's lovely to hear from you. Also, I do believe in the City of London this evening. Good evening, gents. Enjoying the show. Delighted to hear it, Tom. A basic question. Beyond the attention-grabbing headlines of business moving out of the city, is there a legal basis or reason some liquidity is moving to the European Union, or is it purely political? With regards to rate swaps moving to the US, do the European Union now view this as a more robust legal system for their firms to clear their business?
So on the second one is easy. I don't think the EU credibly regard the US as somehow better than the UK. It's just a purely political thing. So on the first, there is it arises from the fact of how the equivalence regimes work, and the fact that the EU have sort of stipulated under their system that EU shares have to be traded on an EU venue. And so now, but there's a cost to that, which is why I think this will be short term, because it will not have the same liquidity benefits, I believe, longer term as in London, because of all the other activity going on in London, the innovation in London and the other products and so on. So there'll be an onshore and offshore world of markets in most sectors that start to develop, and I think companies wanting access to the most liquid and deepest markets will vote with their feet and seek to come somehow to London, and we'll find legal ways for them to do that. So I think these are legally driven things, but there is a massive price, and so and the price, to be clear, is paid by EU businesses and individuals and consumers wanting access to financial products and services, because at some point those people are going to wake up and realize they're paying more, and they're paying unnecessarily more for the privilege of people having a few tiny little operations in the EU, which are not going to end up being world-class markets. They're just going to be an unnecessary overhead, and that's the truth of it. And that's why London really has the magnetic pull that it's got. We need to focus on our magnet, not worry about these sorts of other steps, because all they do is layer on costs for other people who will at some point, the consumers and businesses will at some point rise up and say they don't want to pay those costs.
Excellent answer altogether. Thank you very much. I hope that's been helpful to you, Tom, because certainly it's an interesting insight. I think the other thing we have to say is, there was always some business that was absolutely bound to go to the European Union. Euro-denominated repo, which is a function of the banking system. It would be insane for that not to be in the Eurozone. And yes, and a lot of people got very worked up last week because the European Union emissions allowances, they decided to move that to Amsterdam. I think the clue there was in the title, European Union emissions allowances. If they are essentially auctioning something that those people own, then it seems only fair that they should be transacted in the European Union, which is slightly different to the idea of overall, the suzerainty of just any old euro that you happen to have in a swap here or there. Thank you very much, Barney, for a great answer, says Tom Lant, and certainly we had a great mention also from Martin Watkins, thanking you for your answer earlier on. Now, I think I'm going to make a guess. I think this is Peter Niklovich. I can't actually see beyond the N in London, but he's asking, hello, Peter, anyway, it's great to see you. Good evening, gents. If not equivalence, how about Singapore on Thames? Is this realistic or likely?
Yes, so that is what I covered in the Art of the No Deal, and in fact in Restoring UK Law just now, in the one I just published. It is definitely achievable, and I think we should do it, and I think it will happen. Of course, we won't be Singapore on Thames. Singapore have got different elements to their system, which are not ones that I suspect the UK will do. Every country is different. It has its own values and approaches to almost every single question. So, but they are a common law based country, and there are an awful lot of commonalities. And so whilst we're waiting on the EU's equivalence deliberations, and I don't think we should get too troubled by those, we should be lifting off the panoply of EU law and reviving our common law system, which means legal certainty. We need to have fewer rules. They need to be comprehensible by everyone. They need to be clear, predictable enforcement. And that means also, and I've covered this in the Restoring UK Law publication, we also need our regulators to be subject more to the rule of law through more judicial review, more court cases on small matters like the financial ombudsman scheme replaced by small claims courts, and then finally more parliamentary oversight informed by some sort of expert body panel that helps a subcommittee sort of delve into instances of potential regulatory overreach. Once we get that, and the US, and that's all of that's largely mimicked or to be found in the US system with Congress, the role of congressional committees and judicial review in the States. So there are precedents for this. In fact, there are UK precedents for this. We need to look back a few years. And our system can be made predictable again with fewer rules, which creates market certainty. And that will then unleash all the innovation I'm talking about. So when people talk about Singapore on Thames, I think that's what they're talking about. And that, yes, we can do that. I think we should do that. I think we will do that. It'll take 3 to 5 years probably, though. I mean, the amount of lift is very significant. We need to do it properly and thoroughly. But we need to set the direction now. We need to get the compass. I hope the book, The Restoring UK Law, sets out the compass and why. I've covered, as you said at the outset, Patrick, before you do anything, you have to understand why. And it sets out the why behind, the design of the compass as well.
I think that's absolutely fascinating, and I think it's a very, very interesting. Thank you, Barney, says Peter Niktovich, and it's great to hear from you this evening, Peter. I haven't heard from you in a while. Hope all is well with you. It's quite fascinating altogether, though, also, because this Singapore on Thames thing seems to get bandied about, and of all the regulators that you do not want to be on the wrong side of, I have to say Singapore is right up there in terms of regulators who are absolutely firm in enforcing their law. And I found it quite funny that everybody says, oh, Singapore on Thames lacks regulation. Well, actually, no, it's pragmatic regulation. But when you're on the wrong side of that law, you're finished. I mean, it's a comprehensive process, and the due process is not extreme, but it's certainly incredibly firm and final.
And that's the same in our traditional method and the common law method. And in the States, I mean, the quid pro quo for the freedom to innovate, which is so valuable in my view, and will be why the city continues to flourish for hundreds of years more. The quid pro quo is that the law is actively enforced. Now, obviously, there'll be big checks and balances on that to make sure that it's properly and fairly enforced and predictably enforced. And part of fairness is that when something is going to be seen as wrong. But where that's the case, if someone's deliberately gone and done something that the system have said you can't do, and there's a good reason for that, then there will be enforcement. And you're right. I mean, that's how other common law systems work. Singapore is an example. The US is another example. I mean, we don't have in our system, we are different from the US in as much as we don't have punitive damages. We don't have punitive fines from the regulators. And so we look for our system to our system to provide redress. Nor do we have jury trials, so we have expert judges that get their heads around all the facts and look in detail to everything. So I think we have a very good system. It works well for us. It's not overly punitive, but there clearly are consequences if people deliberately go and do something that's clearly wrong.
Yes. Policing what is clearly wrong, that's something which we would like to see happening more often at all possible levels. And then that could get us very quickly onto accountability. We could run through the entire alphabet and go from, well, A to V and get to vaccine in 5 seconds. And before you know it, we'd be, oh, well, let's never get there. Look, we're into the last 5 or 6 minutes of the show. I'm here with Barney Reynolds. Barney, I want to just pick up on one thing, because you mentioned it briefly earlier on. If the European Union isn't playing ball on how to service customers, and we've seen ESMA, the European regulator, making various quite rather fierce remarks about, oh, we don't want to hear anything about reverse solicitation, blah, 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 blah. How does that work in order to manage to service customers in these times, in this semi-dark period where we don't have an arrangement of equivalence while we wait for the European Union to come to its senses?
Well, I mean, we're back in the position we were in the 1990s before the passport got going. The passport came in, and the beginning of it was in 1995 with the ISD, the Investment Services Directive, really. But it only really got going in 2007 with MiFID. And before, in the 90s, and I was there giving advice then, I am that old, basically you'd have to navigate the regulatory perimeters of the various member states. And we're back to that situation now, which is the default. It's how business is done in Asia and elsewhere in the world. So it's not, some terrible situation. It's something where there are legal methods for doing business. The ESMA opinion you're referring to, so there is a way of dealing with any customer in the EU that comes to the market, says, look, I want to buy your equities or these types of equity from you, or whatever it is. And there are ways, MiFID II contains reverse solicitation provisions in a number of places, in preambles and in the text. And that allows, and it's a recognition of the underlying concept architecture of the EU system itself. That allows EU customers to reach outside the EU regulatory framework and to get the service from the buyers, the buyer in the buyer's location under the buyer's legal and regulatory framework. And ESMA then wrote an opinion saying, oh, no, that's, to be very careful using this. And they came up with some examples, like people who had click-throughs, on their sites for their customers, just new customers to come in and sort of reverse solicit. And they're saying they didn't regard those techniques as valid. But they did not say that the law doesn't exist. And in fact, they have no authority to interpret the law. It's the ECJ, as in fact that opinion made clear. It wasn't really a legal opinion as such, in the sense that they're not the ones that decide what the law is. That's a matter of pan-EU law determined ultimately by the ECJ. But there are provisions in the law allowing for this, and they can be relied on. The ESMA opinion was not doing more than expressing a view on certain very peripheral interpretations of how that might apply, and saying that they don't regard those as valid. And obviously, they were a bit of a caricature of some of the examples, and not ones that I'd recommend relying on anyway. So I don't think anything's changed. The law is what it is. It would have to be changed. There was a French attempt to narrow the reverse solicitation exclusion, which led to a minor change to it in the context of the investment firm review, which in a non-paper of a couple of years ago, I think it was 2018 actually, where they floated the idea with the other member states of restricting it very significantly, so that you could only they defined the sort of nature of a request from the seller in London in a very narrow way, so that you'd have to keep going back and asking again and again for the next thing and the next type of thing and so on. That was rejected by the other member states. So there was an attempt to do it. It didn't fly. The law could be changed. I doubt it personally, because it's a benefit to the EU to be able to get access to global capital flows, and anything they did to the law would affect the US, with US trade structures and financial structures, and Singapore and elsewhere they do business with. So, so it never say never. I mean, they could have an entirely mercantilist approach to financial services, but I think it's unlikely to change much, and I think the EU will just get used to dealing with a different type of London.
So the EU will get used to dealing with a different type of London. That's the perfect moment, Barney, where I've got to ask you a final question. What would you like to see, or what do you think you're going to see that new kind of London looking like when you emerge unblinking into the spring sunlight towards the blossom and the end of lockdown? What's going to be the situation for London now and in the future?
Well, I hope in the near future we'll set a direction of travel. The Treasury are consulting on the new regulatory framework, legal regulatory framework. I hope the government will adopt the sort of proposal I've got, which is lift off all this EU code-based stuff, go back to the common law, oversee the regulators to have predictability, and let people innovate. And then over the next, and I hope that'll be a declared direction in the next few months, and that over the next 3 years or so, we'll implement on that. And so my wish is that the city becomes again a place that people come to from all over the world to innovate. I'd add that the position is somewhat different from how it has been historically, in the sense that the fact that the world is so virtual now, and that people can seek out their services and products as they do with Google and Instagram and all the sort of other sort of virtual services. I would envisage and hope that financial services becomes like that, so that anyone wanting to be here and benefit from our legal and regulatory system and incubate and develop and offer financial services and products that are truly value add and innovative to people can do it to anyone in the world who's wanting to receive those services. And I think increasingly it's going to be difficult for countries to prevent their consumers and businesses reaching out for those services in a virtual way, in the same way that basically countries allow people to access the online services I've mentioned in the more broader economy context, and don't sort of have all sorts of rules to try and clamp down on them. In a way, there's no way they can clamp down on them, in fact. And I would imagine that financial services could well end up like that as well. And if we manage to combine our legal and regulatory setup, which leads to massive trust, financial services is based on trust, with this modern environment where the customers are king and can control what they want and just go and get it on their iPhones whenever they want, wherever they want. It's difficult for anyone to police that or really stop it, frankly, but it's up to countries whether they decide to do that. Then I think the future for the city is extremely bright, and it'll be the place to be, as it already is anyway, but I think it'll be the place to be.
Barney Reynolds, on that optimistic note of Brexiteerian optimism, ladies and gentlemen, you can catch a lot of fantastic reading on the Politeia website. Barney's got several papers and books which you can download. They are thoroughly worth reading, every single one of them. It's been absolutely fantastic as we work towards a reclaimed British common law system, as Barney was putting it. And indeed, based upon what better, ladies and gentlemen, the presumption of freedom. And that goes all the way back to what often gets lost in this discussion, the enormous why over Brexit and how Britain can manage to move towards its new and free society, rather than being bound by reactionary principles, by some form of precautionary principle. And indeed, one thing struck me that Barney said this evening. He was talking about Northern Europe and how that's prospered under the Eurozone. And I was thinking, yes, really, when you look at Northern Europe, not a lot has changed. I would say it's down to only one word. If you think about it, these days, Northern Europe is working where it's seeing the Eurozone working for them. And they say, let us eat cake. Now, of course, a couple of 100 years ago, one very glamorous young lady said, let them eat cake. And that didn't end remotely well for Marie Antoinette, or indeed that current French government. What will be our future? I don't know, but I'm certainly very optimistic about the future of Brexit Britain. Thank you very much once again, Barney Reynolds. It's been absolutely a pleasure. Go to the Politeia website to pick up on some of Barney's excellent previous missives. Go to the Prosperity YouTube and pick up on that great session that Barney chaired, where he was so kind as to invite me to sit between the two probably greatest self-made billionaires of the exchange and market structure industry in our history, both of whom made a great deal of wealth out of the City of London. And on that note, ladies and gentlemen of pure Brexit optimism, the one thing I can tell you is that there is no need for a reverse solicitation. We will be back next Tuesday at 7 p.m. Central European Time, 6 p.m. London time. We're going to be looking at the study of cycles. I think that's going to be a fascinating topic. This is Patrick L. Young saying thank you very much. Have a great week in markets. Thank you to all of our production crew, to Ola, to Veronica, to Beata, to Claude, and indeed to Pippa. And most significantly also, finally, ladies and gentlemen, to those of you who are asking questions today, Peter Niklovich, Martin Watkins, and Tom Latt. Great questions from all of you. Have a great week in life and markets. My name is Patrick Young. That is the end of IPO-VID 20.
Thanks, Patrick.